floor is open. Yeah.
So I have a question from a previous class. It wasn't yours, but we were talking about basically getting rid of physicality and trying to focus on our spirituality in this world. We do that by focusing on physical things in this world.
Yes, focusing on physical or not focusing on physical?
Not focusing on physical.
Okay.
In order to concentrate on the spiritual.
Yeah.
So, but to what point are we trying to get rid of physicality? How much physicality can we actually get rid of in this world?
There's a deep point here. Getting rid of physicality in order to emphasize spirituality. Let me try to put the point very brutally. Does God care about mud? Well, He's creating it all the time. Process of creation is continuous. He's creating mud all the time. Could it be a throwaway? Does God regret having to make mud, just has no choice? Let me tell you what the Mesilas Yesharim says, Path of the Just, in chapter 26. He's talking there about the difference between purity and holiness. Tara, Kedusha in Hebrew. Purity, he said, means making sure that you minimize your contact with the physical so that the contact with the physical will not absorb you and pull you to a position where the physical rules you. So Tara means to retreat, is what you're describing. Retreat from the physical so that the interaction with the physical won't debilitate your ability to focus on the spiritual. But he says holiness, which is higher than purity, holiness tolerates enormous attention to and interaction with the physical. Take, for example, he said, the altar in the temple. The altar is holy of holies. People don't know this because the courtyard where the altar sat is called only holy. And then there's 2 levels till you get to the Holy of Holies where the Ark is. So you think, well, that's the precinct of the Holy of Holies. But in a certain sense, it's not true because the altar itself, sitting outside, is Holy of Holies. It's Kodesh Kedoshim. What happens on the altar? Well, fat meat gets burned up there, and wine gets poured out there, and the finest flour of cakes are made and are burned there. Wow, that's not separating from the physical. How is it possible that something that's immersed in the physical could be holy? How does that work with the idea that in order to concentrate on your spirituality, you have to detach yourself from physicality? So there's a difference. I mean, purity that we started with is a real consideration. It's a real criterion, but there's a difference between the means and the end. The end is not to be disconnected from the physical. The end is to make the physical work for your spirituality. So it means that although you are interacting with the physical, what did the priests who have a special level of holiness, what did they do? They were butchering animals, slaughtering animals and butchering them and putting the meat on the altar and pouring out the blood on the altar. That wasn't meditating in a cave. That was very involved in the physical. But the question is, what is your attitude towards the physical? If your focus is on the spiritual, then you can afford to be integrated into the physical. So the ultimate goal is not to be detached from the physical. The ultimate goal is to be able to dictate to the physical that it should serve you, not that it should seduce you and undermine you and pull you into its orbit. So I think you have to distinguish between a local strategy for a person on a certain level who's developing and trying to develop his powers versus the picture of the ideal, which is a different picture. Now, of course, I don't know who said what it said, and I don't have to know. But let me give you an example of where he's coming from. in the way of God, Belutzato, he describes what it means to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And the definition he gives is this: to serve God means to turn towards God and to desire and pursue closeness to Him and attachment to Him. When I first read that, about 130 years ago, I thought to myself, turn towards Him. That's the first move. The first move in serving God is to turn towards Him. Gee, that means I must be pointing in the wrong direction. Otherwise, why would I have to turn to Him? Why am I pointing in the wrong direction? And now it's clear that the physical world draws your attention, and it draws your consideration, and it draws your sense of value to the extent that you can be absorbed into it. It can set the limits on your imagination. You know that my words apply to a great proportion of the Western population at the present time. You know that. To the extent that the spiritual is something you have to turn to in order to be able to interact with. So that is definitely a danger. So, but one has to realize that this idea of detaching from the physical is a means towards the end of acquiring certain spiritual strength so that you can go back and immerse yourself in the physical without danger of being absorbed into it. That's number one. Now, number two, I think that you can work on both sides of the fence at the same time. You can try to minimize certain unnecessary interactions with the physical in order to be able to avoid that drag. But also you can take some of the interactions of the physical and specifically elevate them, specifically integrate them into the spiritual, so that they don't cause that danger anymore. One of the Talmudic sages said, I only participate in a full-fledged meal, a full-course meal, when it's a meal celebrating some mitzvah. So he saw gastronomical delight as something which could be challenging, but if you're celebrating a bar mitzvah, or you're celebrating a bris milah, or you're celebrating a holiday meal, or a Rosh Chodesh meal, or you're celebrating the finishing of a Masech, or something else like that, where the whole theme is a spiritual theme, then he felt that the enjoyment of the meal is something which he could integrate into the spiritual, and then it wouldn't have that danger. So I think there are two things to do here. Number one, to detach from the things that are unnecessary, but also try to use some of the things in a positive way. And the third thing I want to say is this will depend upon where you are in life and what your present condition is. When I first came here, it was January, 43 years ago, there was a fellow here who told me that he had a challenge in his life. What was the challenge? Reading or not reading Sports Illustrated. Now, for those of you who have been living under a rock, Sports Illustrated is the most important central sports magazine in the world. There's no second or third or fourth. Others are in 10th and 12th. And he got it every week, delivered to the yeshiva, right here. And he said, I'm learning Gemara, and I really feel that I shouldn't spend the time on Sports Illustrated, but I'm going to miss it if I don't have it. So I asked him, how long does it take you to read the Sports Illustrated? It's about 2 hours. I said, how many hours a day are you going to feel bad about not having it? So he said, probably about an hour a day. So I said, if that's so, keep getting it, you're 5 hours ahead. Because it's easy 7 versus 2. 3 months later, he canceled the subscription. He wasn't ready for it yet. It would have been too big a disruption. The canceling the subscription would cause him more time thinking about sports, not less. So he'd be worse off by canceling the subscription. And then he got to the point where he outgrew that interest. So that also has to be taken into account, where you are and what kind of steps are practical for you and what the consequences of the steps will be. That's a little background on the thing we're talking about. Yeah.
So we're created with different capabilities. Like some people have an easier time running Torah than others. But are we all created with the same ability to fulfill our purpose?
Yeah, it's almost true by definition. After all, who's making the purpose? Hashem. Well, he wouldn't give you a purpose and then not give you the ability to fulfill the purpose. That would be, so to speak, shooting himself in the leg. Right? I mean, he'd be setting up an impossible task. You know, so a person who is in control of the circumstances doesn't do that. But of course, it's quite difficult to know what your purpose is.
Yeah.
And in this regard, I want to guard against another type of standard distortion. Sometimes it's put this way: you have the ability to overcome every challenge. Okay, now, you know, with my background, I'm addicted to words and precision. And does you have the ability to conquer every challenge mean or imply, yeah, turn it off. Yeah, it'll go off. Just, you know, has its own schedule. Does the ability to be successful at every challenge imply the ability to overcome every obstacle? Some people take it that it must, and when they're faced by a difficult obstacle, and they make an effort, and they are having difficulty in succeeding, so they conclude, well, God gave me the strength, so if I'm not succeeding, I must not be using the strength. I may think that I'm doing my best, but I'm not doing my best. I'm cheating, I'm lying to myself, you know, and go down the emotional rabbit hole. But actually, they don't imply one another. Because it might be that some obstacles are challenges to be overcome, and some obstacles are not challenges to be overcome. And maybe what you do is take the first statement and use it backwards. Since I have the ability to be successful in overcoming every challenge, when I see an obstacle that I don't have the ability to overcome, that obstacle isn't a challenge. You use the proposition that you have the ability to overcome every challenge to identify what is a challenge and what isn't a challenge. Sometimes, when there's an obstacle in your way, the challenge is to live with the fact that you can't overcome it. That's the challenge, not to overcome the obstacle. And I'm wishing on all of you that you should have this frustration, because it is an inevitable frustration of being a parent. There are times when the child has a problem, and you as a parent know the solution to the problem without any question, but you know that the child can't take it from you. The child can't accept the answer from you. That's very frustrating. And what you have to do is you have to live with your inability to overcome this obstacle. One of the things that's advised is that find someone the child trusts and believes in, and they communicate the solution to that person, and let that person give it to the child. He can't take it from you. So, yes, you have the ability to overcome every challenge, given, however, that you correctly identify what the challenges are. And then, some of the challenges are more central to your purpose in being in the world, and some of the challenges are less central to your purpose being in the world. And there are two levels that you could identify with this idea of purpose of being in the world. Rav Dessler talks about this, and it's based on Tosfos in various places, that there's the goal that you are put in the world to achieve, and then there are the means that are given to you in order to achieve that goal. And prayer, which can be effective, can only be effective on the second level. If you pray for a change of circumstances which would divert you from the purpose for which you were created, the prayer will never come true. It will never come true. If you pray to change the means by which you can achieve that goal, that prayer might be answered positively. The example that Rav Dessler gives is this. Imagine a person who's put in the world to promote study of Torah. And let's imagine that at present time he's in a small town and he's poor is employed to teach the children in the, in elementary school there in the cheder. That's what he does, and he's praying for money. He finds living in poverty very difficult, and he's praying for money. Well, it might happen that he will make a lot of money and move to a large city, and then he will furnish various institutions of Torah learning with their needs. So he'll be fulfilling the purpose of promoting Torah study in a different way. But if he decides to become a surgeon or become a sailor, it's not going to work, because there he's not going to be able to do it. So the really difficult thing is identifying what your purpose is in the world. There's one criterion which goes back to the Gra. I think I also saw this from Rav Dessler, and that is, and this is going to be very bitter now, one criterion is the thing that's hardest for you to do. That's it. The thing you have most trouble with, the thing that you're most frustrated about, the thing you try and fail, that's it. That's the one that really needs your attention. No sweet sailing, through life. There may be others. I don't know the whole literature on this subject. But then it's a place where you at least have to put a lot of emphasis.
Like if we have the ability to overcome every challenge, it doesn't necessarily mean we always do overcome every challenge. So why is it that some people may overcome like 90% of the challenge that they're faced with, and others might overcome only 60% of it? Does that not?
Well, first of all, don't forget you won't be able to know that. Right? Looking from the outside, you won't be able to know that. Could be that the things that they're doing are easy for them, and they aren't their real challenge. So you can't. It's like I say, if Einstein gets 96 on the exam, terrible. He should have blown the teacher out of the water. I should have shown him all the things he didn't know, let him get making 4-point mistake. Less was in calculation. Einstein was very bad at calculation. And then each person's life has a certain rhythm, and that rhythm will be tailored, made for that person. It could be that much of your life is preparation for the main challenge at age 42. Whereas another person's life is an accumulation of small successes, which build into a larger whole. So very difficult to tell.
If your purpose is to do something at age 42, is it possible that something could happen and you would die at, say, age 30?
It's certainly possible. It's certainly possible, especially because it might be due to an interaction with somebody else's free will.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And someone else's free will can change the outcome. Then it has to be repaired in some other way, but it can change the outcome. That's another long story. That's a big story. Yeah. You have a question, okay?
Yeah. I was wondering if there's a way for us to be able to tell if the origin of our thoughts are from the Yetzer HaRa or the Yetzer HaTov.
Oh, that's a good question. The short answer is no. There's a midrash when Jacob fought with the angel that says that part of the time the angel looked like an armed robber, and part of the time the angel wore the turban of a Torah scholar. And the Yetzer HaRa has a variety of strategies with which he puts pressure on a person. He can say, I know you want to keep kosher, but look, this week at McDonald's there's a 2-for-1 bacon cheeseburger sale, 2 for 1. You could be kosher next week, but this week, how can you pass that up? Right? That's just blatant in your face. And other times when the Yetzer HaRa will come with the Shulchan Aruch, and open up to a page, it says, see, it says right here to do Q. Right here it says, you have to do Q. What it doesn't tell you is when you turn over the page, it says, you have to do Q on the second Thursday of the 4th month once a year. Oh, once a year. Oh, but he didn't tell me that. All he showed me was I have to do it, right? He can lie to you. He'll paint things with a distortion of their consequences. And then the challenge is to see through the lie, to figure it out on your own. So there's no foolproof way to do this. Like everything else in life, you do your best and you pray to God that it come out the way He wants it to come out. You pray to God to be successful, and then you've acted responsibly. You can't be held responsible for any failure once you've done that. But Yetzer HaRa doesn't wear the Yetzer HaRa badge on his chest and say, yeah, here I am to do evil. No, sometimes he comes pretending to do good. And that makes life quite complicated. Now, one of the things you do is you consult with other people. I don't know the extent to which this is still done. I read a book about Mussar yeshivas in Europe 150 years ago, where in some yeshivas they would have a group of students, let's say 8 students. They would meet once a week, and at each meeting, 7 would give their honest impressions of the 8th. Sometimes they were written out, and sometimes they weren't signed, so you wouldn't know who said what. But these are 7 people who are with you in the study hall every day, and they interact with you, and they see you, and they can give you feedback on what they see about your presentation, what you're doing, what your priorities are, how you behave. It's a very, very valuable thing to have. Also, to be in touch with older people with whom you invest in a relationship, so you can get feedback from them. They think people often misinterpret themselves, both sometimes to be too lenient with themselves and sometimes to be too strict with themselves. I make an analogy to athletic training. You have a trainer, and sometimes he'll say, you're lazy, you could do double. And sometimes he'll say, don't try that, it's too dangerous, you may injure yourself. So you're not ready for it. And you may not agree with those judgments. I've been trained, so I know what it means, and I've made both mistakes. And I've benefited greatly from these people who are very experienced, and they know how to train you. Spiritual development also needs training like that.
Rabbi, why does Hashem allow suffering and evil to exist in the world?
As I say it again?
Why does Hashem allow suffering and evil to exist in the world?
Okay, there's a giant literature on the subject. The whole book of Job is about this subject, and it's a long book, and then it's not the sort of thing that can be usefully answered in 180 seconds. But I will tell you 2 things. First of all, you said it with a certain amount of caution, which I appreciate. You asked, why does he allow these things to exist in the world? You didn't ask, why does he create them in the world? Usually that's the way it's asked. And I think your way of asking the question is a little bit better. Now, let's understand that the world that God created, the world he created, didn't have any of those things in it. He created the Garden of Eden. There was no sickness and no accidents and no need to work for a living, and it was Gottleib all year long, with perfect atmosphere, and they didn't need clothes. The food was plentifully available. All the suffering and tragedies and the rest that you're talking about, he didn't create that world. We created that world. Okay, he made it conditional upon our action that it would work out that way, but he didn't set it up that way. He set it up without all those things. So we have to take responsibility for its developing that way. We used our free will, and that was the consequence of our use of our free will. You could ask why he set it up conditionally. If you do this, this will be the outcome, but that's not the same question. It's not as if he's ignoring the evil in the world. He set up the world in such a way that evil wouldn't be there. And then he said, if there's a failure, then that will be the result. So you'll have to understand ultimately that the result is a way of correcting the failure. That's the deep thing. That's a project, but that's the idea of the answer. And the second idea of the answer is that without some aspect of evil in the world, free will isn't possible. And God did not create the world for squirrels, and He didn't create the world for angels either. He created the world for creatures that could be as godlike as a creature can be. And one element, this is chapter 2 in The Way of God by Lutzato, and one of the key elements of what God is that He is what He is because of Himself. Nothing made Him, nothing changes Him, nothing affects Him, nothing causes anything in Him. He is totally self-determined, self-defined, self-contained, totally autonomous. Creatures, like squirrels, are the exact opposite. There's nothing about a squirrel that comes from the squirrel itself. This world is a creature. He's made by God, and everything he is something that God put into him. The only creature that has some element of self-creation is a human being, and that's because of free will. When I make a decision, I made it. God didn't make it, I made it. He gave me the ability to make it, but I made it. And therefore what I do and what I become through what I do is my own, it belongs to me. It's part of my identity. In that way, I become like God. And he created the world so there'll be creatures that'll be like him, not just playthings to play with. It's not a game of solitaire. He invites us into a relationship with him, that there has to be some equality between us. So that's the short answer. Without some aspect of evil, like the evil inclination, which tempts us to do the wrong thing, without that there wouldn't be any free will. And without that, the whole project wouldn't be able to get off the ground. So those are some things to think about.
I have a
Yeah.
question with that. Then was Adam never meant to pass the test because then he only got free will after failing it. So if he did the universe for us to have free will and for us to interact with it, then that only makes sense if Adam was made to fail a test.
Okay, the logic is good, but the premises are wrong. After all, he was held responsible for the failure. Then he must have had free will. If he didn't have free will, he wouldn't have been responsible. So he definitely did have free will.
That's right.
Free will, huh? So free will comes in various qualities. The question is what your options are. By eating from the tree of knowledge, his options vastly expanded. But beforehand, he also had the option of either eating from the tree or not eating from the tree, and he chose freely to eat from the tree. So he definitely had free will. Even though there are passages and passages, okay, but that's the bottom line. He definitely had free will, yeah.
So for the names that we put in at the end of the Amidah, what are the pasukim that we put in for our names at the end of the Amidah? What's the idea behind it?
What's said is very enigmatic. You might forget your name, but you won't forget your verse. So, and the first and last letters of the verse are the first and last letters of your name. So, but whether it's more likely you'll forget your name, forget the verse, I mean, in practical psychological terms, it's very hard to understand that. So I don't really know. I think there's explanations like that really hide more than they reveal. And you have to be careful because sometimes explanations do that. There's a story about the Chafetz Chaim, which I think illustrates this and illustrates related terms in a very, very poignant way. There was a man whose son, I don't know how old the son was, 6 years old, who was very ill, and the doctors had given up hope. So he went to the Chafetz Chaim, and the Chafetz Chaim said, there's a doctor in a city, told him the name of the city, name of the doctor, quite a distance away, and he has a cure for this problem. So the doctor made the journey to the city and found the doctor. The father made the journey, found the doctor, and the doctor said, yes, I do have a cure for this. And he gave him the instructions, and the father came back, and the son actually recovered. But the Chafetz Chaim told him, don't tell this story to anybody. And he didn't for a while. But years went by, and whatever the occasion was, he felt, it was out of the woods, and he told the story. Right thereafter, the son got sick. Went to doctors, no one could help. Went back to the Chafetz Chaim and said, I must confess, you told me not to tell the story. I did tell the story, and my son is sick. What should I do now? The Chafetz Chaim said to him, I fasted for your son 40 days. I'm too old now. I can't do it again. It means the doctor was just a cover-up. It wasn't the doctor's medicine that saved him. The Chafetz Chaim didn't want him to know that the cure came from the Chafetz Chaim's fasting. He didn't want him to know that. So he sent it to the doctor to cover it up. You hear a story like that and you say, oh, so you see, there's a policy here of not letting everybody know everything. Some things are covered up because they need to be covered up. So when you hear an explanation like that, and intuitively you think, come on, I'm going to forget my name, but I'm going to remember the verse, and with the verse I'll be able to identify myself if I forgot my name. What is that all about? Well, there might be circumstances under which you'll be caused to forget your name. And then, not naturally, psychologically, and then if you have the verse, that'll be your ticket to get it back or something like that. And I'll give you an example of something that I have heard. Gehenna, which is the suffering of a soul after it dies, after the death of the body and the soul. And by the way, if a person does tshuva, there's no punishment at all. The Rambam says that tshuva is a wall against punishment. No punishment can take place. This means the person didn't do tshuva, and something has to be done. And the suffering in Gehenna does it. What kind of suffering is it? You don't have a body, so it's not being burned in fire. One explanation was this. You're given total amnesia, and then your life, you don't know it's your life, but your life history is paraded in front of you, and you're asked to pass judgment. What's good, what's bad, how serious. A lot of the way we think about ourselves is because it's me, and I have lots of excuses, and I have lots of ways to justify what I did, and so forth and so on. Whereas when I look at somebody else, I'm much less motivated to justify. And then, after the soul has passed judgment on its whole life history, then memory is restored. And to experience the pain of having had that life with that evaluation, one's own evaluation of that life. So there's a case where you won't know your name. You won't know your name because you won't know your identity. So I don't know whether the verse can help you get back or whatever it is, but I'm just pointing out that if you take the explanation, you might forget your name, but this will help. That doesn't make sense. And you're allowed to say it doesn't make sense. Some explanations aren't meant to really make sense on the surface. They're meant to sort of tell you there's something there, but not really explain to you what it is that's there. By the way, there are four different dimensions four main dimensions of interpreting verses in the scriptures. Pshat, Remez, Drush, and Sod. Pshat, these are inadequate descriptions, but Pshat is supposed to be the simple meaning, the logical meaning, the literal meaning, or something like that. Drush is a way of interpreting through it, connecting code words to other words and extracting or discovering moral principles or spiritual principles. Remez is where there are letters and connections between letters and numbers and so forth and so on. And so is Kabbalistic ideas. And when you hear the descriptions, you think, okay, so Pshat I could, relate to. It's in the words, and I can discuss it, and perhaps even discuss how to understand it, interpret it. And then the other ones are esoteric, especially when you talk about Sod, which is Kabbalistic, that's, in the sky. The Gaon of Vilna was quoted as saying that, in a certain sense, Pshat, the simple meaning, comes last. I think, what do you mean? Why would that come last? Well, there are cases in which you don't appreciate the literal meaning until you've heard the Sod. I'll give you an example. The Ramchal, Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, in the Adir B'Maro, writes that the animals at the time of the Garden of Eden could all speak. They could all speak. So I read that and I said, really? Hey, wait a minute. What does it say about the Garden of Eden? That there was a snake, and the snake was smarter, more clever than all the beasts of the field. Really? Listen, according to the story, the snake talks, the snake lies, the snake deceives. And now you're told, and also I want you to know, here's another piece of information, he's smarter than a cow. Why wasn't that obvious? Would you have thought that cows were on a par, given what it says that he does there? I thought to myself, it never occurred to me to ask that question. What does it mean he's smarter than the animals when you read the story and he can do things that no animal can do? Oh, because actually the animals then weren't like our animals. So having read that piece of Sod by Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, I understood what it meant in that verse. It never occurred to me beforehand. So sometimes you don't appreciate the pshat until you see those deeper things, and then later you come out and you can get something out of it that you otherwise couldn't get. Yeah.
I think I might have come to an answer from this lecture, but I'm still curious to ask the question. Why might have God created the nature of life so that as you get older, people tend to have more, medical illnesses and difficulties of that nature in life?
So, first of all, as I said at the outset, he didn't create it that way. There was not going to be any old age or any illnesses at all, and so forth and so on. In the Garden of Eden, none of that would have applied. And indeed, our sources say that the appearance of getting older was something that was asked for and granted, so that Abraham would look different from Yitzchak. And losing your powers, Hirsch says, losing your powers when you get older is to reconcile you to dying. Reconcile you to dying. So there are also, diseases have many functions. One of them is to wake people out of their dogmatic slumber, which was used someplace else, and to think, what am I doing here? Why am I here? And to think seriously about their life options. The editor of the Jerusalem Post came down to interview some of the students here. This was like 40 years ago. And they were talking about what brought them to yeshiva. I happened to be sitting there. And Americans came here for reasons you can readily understand. One was an Israeli. He said, I was in Lebanon, and we were having a war. And I thought, the next bullet might have my name on it. What am I doing here? There's 100,000 Israelis in Los Angeles, another 100,000 in Johannesburg. What am I doing here? And he came to Ohr Somayach to find out what he was doing there. So that also wakes you up, makes you think twice about what you're doing instead of just coasting and letting life, coasting downstream. If you see a fish going downstream, maybe it's dead, just floating with the run of the water. So diseases have a lot of purposes. But you're right to ask what role they play in this world. But to think of God creating the world, he didn't create the world that way. He didn't make it that way. Yeah.
As what he was talking about earlier, is it possible that we have multiple missions here? Multiple things we're supposed to be doing?
Yeah, you see, missions is not the sort of thing that we know exactly how to count. I can count pencils, but I can't count principles or ideas. They're too vaguely defined to individuate in that way. So, or you could say the mission has in it various elements and various parts. Yes, it's not as if it could be pigeonholed into one narrow thing. Indeed, now I'm trying to remember where I heard this, but Rav Desta the Ramchal writes that there are slots in life which present certain types of human challenges. Each person's put in a slot, and his job is to overcome the challenges of that particular slot. But then slots can vary in ways. For example, let's take wealth. Wealth is a very difficult slot. The challenges of wealth are very difficult. What about having been born into a wealthy family and then at age 30 losing it all? That's not the same as staying wealthy your whole life. It's a different challenge. Or being born impoverished and then earning it and making it at 30. That's a different challenge than simply being born into it and having it all lifetime. So wealth can be subdivided into a number of different types of slots. And then it'll be dealing with poverty after wealth. So that it's being wealthy and then being in poverty after wealth and dealing with that. And you call that two challenges? You can call it two, or you can call it one compound challenge. I don't mind about the numbers, but it can be a process with different features. That would be the challenge. Yeah.
So we're saying it's like one central challenge, but with that challenge can be many different variables that come up.
Even that, the word central is vague enough to make it work or make it not work, depending upon how you want to describe it. But yeah, you could say it that way. Yeah, in the back.
A little bit off topic, but
Yeah. We have no topic here. This is it's all Q&A, so it's all topic. Yeah.
So I was wondering what the halacha is about living here in Israel under a Jewish state before the time of Moshiach.
Okay, I'm not trained in halacha,
Okay, I guess
but I think that there are values to living in the land of Israel with a state, without a state, under the Romans, under the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the Mamelukes. There's definitely a value in living here and being here. And having a Jewish state creates certain challenges, and there are ways of responding to those challenges, ways of understanding those challenges. But the value of being here, I'll just give you a headline. I have a whole share on this, but I'll give you just a headline. All of the mitzvos of the Torah, all of them were made for the land of Israel. Some are only applicable in the land of Israel. Some are applicable outside the land of Israel. But even Shabbos, which you're required to keep in New York, in a certain sense, you keep Shabbos in New York only for the sake of getting back to the land of Israel and keeping it in Israel. You get credit for it there, but it's not the same quality of credit that you get for keeping it in the land of Israel. So the whole Torah is wrapped around it. We just read now the parshas of leaving Egypt. Every time Hashem says to Moses, or Moses says to the people, you're leaving Egypt, it says, you're leaving Egypt in order to get to the land. Every time. The focus on getting to the land is repeated over and over again. And the book of Deuteronomy also, same thing said over and over again. When you get there, this is what you'll do, and this is what you'll have, and this is the way you have to behave when you get there. It's a tremendous focus on being in the land of Israel. Yeah.
You said to Michael about the purpose of illness is sometimes to reconcile people with death. Is there any commentary about people who die suddenly, for example? Like, I don't know, sometimes there's a 60-year-old guy who's like healthy and then he just, whatever, arrhythmia, drops dead.
Yeah, so, see, your question has a certain structure that's very important. Rabbi Yochanan says in the Gemara that every general proposition has, any part of the legal corpus that is a general proposition has exceptions. His statement isn't part of the legal corpus, so it's not self-contradictory. And he even he goes further to say, every general statement, even if the general statement specifies exceptions, there are other exceptions in addition. So they are meant to be general, but not exceptionless. And it's not as if there's a failure there. It's not as if they're sloppy. That's the way they use their language. Like any language or any culture, you have to become familiar with the way they express themselves. So when you say that sickness has a certain purpose, that's one of many purposes. And some may be more common, some may be less common, and some may not be on the list altogether. So it's not really a question. You said it's for the sake of reconciling yourself to death. What about a guy who doesn't get it? Because there's some other reason why his life should end that way rather than some other way. Sometimes a person's life ends because if he were remain alive, it would be much worse. Here's the example. How about Abraham? Isaac lived to 180. Abraham lived to 175. Jacob lived to 147. In both Abraham and Jacob's case, a special reason is given why they didn't live to 180. In other words, Isaac becomes the standard. I have to explain why the other two lived less. Okay? And in Abraham's case, it was because immediately after he died, Esau went off and became evil. And it wasn't right for Abraham to see that. So he was taken 5 years early. So here you can ask a similar question to yours. Well, if Isaac lived to 180, why didn't Abraham live to 180? The answer is because he was being protected from seeing something which he didn't have to see. Abraham was promised, Tikaver b'seiva tova. When you are buried, you'll be totally satisfied. You will look at your world and say, everything's good. I don't know if anybody since Abraham had that experience. Because always something was less than best, less than good. But he had that, and since Esau was about to go off, his Baruch took him 5 years early. So there can be lots of different reasons. Yeah.
A clarification. I knew you weren't telling me that that's the sole purpose of illness, to reconcile people with death. But let me rephrase. Does that mean that maybe the people who have slower illnesses, Hashem is helping them ease into death because they can't, whatever, they're not equipped to deal with their own death?
So again,
I don't want to put you in a box. I know you're
no,
not
but
making a
first
statement.
of all, when you asked the question, given the context, the question had exactly the content that because I said it was for the sake of this. And you said, well, then how about someone who dies suddenly? Meaning, well, if that's the reason, then how can this happen? How do you explain how this happens? So that's the way in which the question was asked. I don't know if you intended it, but that's the way the question was asked. Now, one second. I was going to say something else before I put in that aside. You're asking why. Why it could be slower in order to. It's. Yeah. Let me see if I can make this point carefully enough not to create a misimpression. There's a question of why people suffer, especially why innocent people suffer. So we have a source that says that Moses asked that question and he got an answer. You can't know that. It's not something you can know. Well, but there are a dozen answers to that in the Talmudic literature. And Moshiach in the Way of God, in part 2, chapters 2 and 3, has 8 different reasons why even righteous, innocent people suffer. So it's meaning I can't get an answer. And the way Sato explains it is this. There are principles which can apply to explain why people suffer. But if you ask me why Reuven is suffering, you will not know which principles they are that apply to his life. Moshe Rabbeinu wanted to know the pratim. How can I tell why this person is suffering? Because Baruch Hu said you can't. That's something which I planned. It's fake as the radla, when somebody knows what that is. It's something which can't be explained to you, at least not in your present condition. But principles that could apply. So, for example, I was told that around the year 1900 in China, everyone died of heart attack. Everyone. Because the person dies, the doctor comes and he listens, is the heart beating? No, heart attack. I mean, his heart's not beating, right? Okay, right? So we say, no, of course not. Not everybody died of heart attack. Yeah, but they couldn't tell, so they just wrote it down. They say, well, didn't they know why people die? Yeah, maybe, but they didn't know why he died. People could die of lung failure, but he's dead and I don't have an x-ray machine, so what am I supposed to do? So now you say, well, if I see a person with this slow illness, then does that mean that this is the reason why it's happening to him? No. You're not going to be able to apply this to individual people and say this is what's happening to him, because that requires knowledge of where his soul came from and everything else that he's done and all those alternatives that would exist, and if he continued to live, what he would have done and all of that. You're not going to be able to say about this concrete person, that's why this is happening to him. You could say it's possible, but there could be a dozen other possibilities as well. That's what I'm trying to avoid, actually getting to individual people and saying, that's why this is happening to you. Yeah.
You mentioned that it's where your soul came from, but you kind of implied that there's multiple places where your soul could come from. So where are those places?
In the Kabbalistic organization of the roots of all existence, there's an endless number. There's an endless number. Original souls weren't like that. Even they had different sources. They had a certain type of source, but they had different sources. Yeah.
What are these places like?
Let me just. I'll tell you. I'll say one thing to you, and then I'm going to take one more question. Then I have to quit. You may read, if you unfortunately look at English translations of Kabbalistic sources, that the first move in creation was that God contracted himself to leave space for other things to exist. Okay? The words are roughly the words in the sources. But the words I just said to you in English are dead false. They're dead false. Because when God performs what this thing is called contraction, the result is an area which is full, chock full, no empty space at all, zero. So to say left space for other things to exist is just wrong. Everything's always full. There's no empty spaces. So then what does it mean? That's the right question. What does it mean? And you don't know what it means. So to start explaining to you Olamos and Spheros and Partsufim and Madregos and so forth and so on, it's you're not at an educational position where you could understand it. So there's no point in doing it. Yeah.
I'm hearing about the law of attraction or Kayach HaMeshach in Jewish literature. I don't know what the place for it is in Judaism.
The law of what?
Of attraction. Kayach HaMeshach. That's a.
Sometimes that's used for gravity. I mean,
No, not gravity.
you mean
I would say it's like what you would go and you would put yourself like try to imagine yourself with the actual thing that you're praying for, and then that would affect God to give it to you, or it'll make it easier. So I could hear that like from a B'tachon point of view, but I don't really hear it.
I'm not familiar with it.
No.
No. I have heard this what you just now laughed and said, and you sort of skirted the words a little bit, or make it easier, you said, which was wise of you to put that qualification in. There is what I think is just magical thinking, that if you imagine yourself having it, then you'll get it. And people talk about good midos or whatever it is, and I say, try it with a glass of water. Okay? Here's the glass. Fill it. Fill it. I'm holding it. Right? You can't? No? Not going to work? Well, it's not going to make you have fear of God. It's not going to make you love God. It's not going to. Am I just imagining? Come on. That's magical thinking. So that distortion of it, that bizarre application of the idea, I have heard. Maybe there's something in the Sifrei Musar which talk about that, but why? Picturing yourself there? I mean, did Moses really want to go into the land of Israel? Did he really want it? I guess so. He davened 15 times to get in, so I guess he really wanted to. He didn't know this trick?
That's actually one of the proofs. Hashem tells him to stop.
Adarabba. Otherwise, he wouldn't have told him to stop. If HaKadosh Baruch Hu created that koach, he created that koach, he said, I don't want you to use it.
Right, we're asking if it's a Kayach.
He was davening. He wasn't imagining. He was davening. That koach we know works. Doesn't always work, but we know has an effect. That's a gigantic literature of how it has its effect. But imagining? Yeah.
How are we supposed to understand that spirituality is infinite?
Infinite.
Isn't it?
Well, okay. Nobody knows what the word infinite means. I taught transfinite mathematics, so I'll tell you, the word infinite probably should be understood as not bounded in some particular dimension or other. I'll just give you a little example. How many whole numbers are there?
Infinite.
Infinite, right? But notice that we left out all the fractions. So to say that something's infinite doesn't mean it encompasses everything. It's everywhere. Everything is part of it. No. There's a certain dimension in which it's not bounded. For whole numbers, the dimension is size. There's no bound of size on that's when, so you can always get a bigger one, right? But they're whole numbers, not fractions, so there's a lot of stuff that isn't there. So when you say that, you said spirituality?
Yeah.
One thing is that there's no limit to how much you can have. So you could say that in terms of growth in the same way, right? But otherwise, in order for the word infinite to be made concrete and understandable, you have to explain what dimension you're talking in where there's no boundary. Yeah, but think of it negatively. Infinite means non-finite. So I say, here's a type of stopping, and in this particular case, that stopping isn't there. The road is open instead of blocked. Then you'll be making a precise statement about infinity.
I just can't imagine how there could be no end to growth. How there's always something. There can't be like I've reached perfection. Like there's no.
See, if I pay careful attention to your words, you just switched places. First you said, I can't imagine that there's no end to growth. And then you asked, there can't be? meaning you can imagine it, and you're wondering if it's true or not.
if you reach perfection, then you have that's like an end goal, and how can it be infinite?
Well, but who says you reach perfection? The only thing that's perfect in that sense is the Creator. And why can't something grow without end? Numbers grow without end. I mean, why can't a thing grow without end? One picture of Olam Haba is Hakadosh Baruch Hu revealing more and more about the kindness that He put into the world. And there's a potential infinity of facts about the world. If you use real numbers to measure things, any one measurement has an infinity in it, because real numbers are decimals that can only be approximated by the number of decimal places you use, and you put in more decimal places, you get a closer approximation, and that's endless. So any one measurement could have an infinity of information in it. That's there's with infinity. Okay.